From Anshe Sfard Bethel Emeth Congregation, it's time to take 10 minutes for Torah with Rabbi Joel Finkelstein.
Welcome to our discussion of Purim, the inner child. Rabbi Michael Rosenzweig of the Yeshiva University, my son Asher's Rabbi, pointed out that on Purim we somehow act in a very sort of childlike kind of way. Not childish, he says, but childlike. And let's try to expand on that and discuss that point. If we look, for instance, at the Megillah, all of a sudden things turn around so dramatically in a way that perhaps only a child could imagine that things could turn around so fast. And based on that, perhaps we can understand the idea in the Gemara that says that Eineim shel aniyim nesuos l'kriyas HaMegillah, that the poor people are always looking forward to the Megillah, which we can interpret in two ways. One is that obviously the poor people know that at the Megillah reading, if they come and stretch out their hand, everyone's obligated to give, because on Purim we give matanos le'avyonim, we give gifts to the poor. So whenever the Megillah is read, they look forward to it, they can get charity, no one asks any questions, and it'll be a wonderful occasion to collect much needed funds. But there's a second meaning as well. Eineim shel aniyim nesuos l'kriyas HaMegillah. The poor lift their eyes in anticipation and hope and longing for the Megillah, because the Megillah is a story that's all about reversal of fortune. It's all about these people who were so downtrodden, so sure of their near annihilation, and yet suddenly everything turned around. And that's why the poor, they look up to this story of the Megillah. They're so anxious to hear this story of how fortunes can turn around. How life is a galgala chozer. It's a cycle that goes around, and today's poor can be tomorrow's rich. Mordechai possesses that childlike optimism. He says, Revach v'atzala yamod la'Yehudim makom acher. He says, Esther, I hope you get involved. I'd love you to be the hero, the heroine of Purim. That would be great. But you know what? If you don't, there will be salvation. He's sure of it. There's no question about it. It required sort of a childlike hopefulness and optimism, but also a Jewish optimism, to be able to look death and annihilation in the face and say, don't worry, we are going to survive it. You see this among Israeli leaders today. They have that conviction that despite the rockets from the north and the rockets from the south and the ISIS and the Iran from the east and from the north, they will survive. They will be good, because Revach v'atzala yamod la'Yehudim makom acher. Salvation, opportunity to breathe and then find space for ourselves. This will surely arise from somewhere. And this, says Rabbi Rosenzweig, that's why we have tichposet, we have dressing up, which is a custom, goes way back, the custom of dressing up. Why? It's a childlike thing. We need to be a little bit childlike today. We need to be a little bit silly. Not because we want to be childish, but because we want to regain that childlike optimism and starry-eyed quality. And that explains the drinking. I mean, never do we find that the rabbis encourage us to drink. On the contrary, the Rambam rails against those who use Yom Tov, and certainly he didn't even think about Shabbos, but certainly even Yom Tov, where you're supposed to drink, but he rails against those who use it to get drunk. It's not a time for drunkenness. Drunkenness is, as the Mishnah Berurah explains from the Meiri, it's a very debasing kind of thing. And yet the Talmud does sort of hint to some sort of a ad lo yada, which all the rabbis interpret to mean that yes, you should get drunk, but not really drunk. But what is this idea that there's any kind of hint of drunkenness on Purim? Again, let's be clear. All the rabbis interpret that you should just have a few extra drinks, you should not get drunk. But why does it sound like they're talking about getting drunk? And that's because there is a quality that we'd like to capture from that drunkenness, and that is an oblivion to the realities of the harsh realities of today, to be able to rejoice in the face of very harsh realities. But don't be fooled. This is not true joy. If it were true joy, we would say Hallel. We don't. If it were true joy, then we wouldn't sit Shiva. Many customs have it that you do sit Shiva on Purim. Generally we don't, but there are those, Rambam and others, who say you would. Because it's not real joy. Real joy is where the reality is in touch with your feelings. Here we're able to find joy even though all the problems are not solved. So if we look at it, I believe there are 4 factors that make us have this childlike optimism. And it makes our joy on Purim somewhat childlike. Because it's almost too fast. I mean, V'na'afohu, it just turned around on a dime. I mean, just in 3 days, everything turned around from annihilation to great joy. Evel Yom Tov, mourning to joy. Only a child. You ever see a child? He's crying and all of a sudden he's laughing. That's childlike. To be so hopeful, that's childlike. To ignore the looming impending dangers, that's childlike. And finally, the idea that it's so easily reversed. The idea that just like a child who cries and all of a sudden he's laughing, he laughs and all of a sudden he cries, it's so easily reversed. This is a childlike quality. Rabbi Eliezer Ashkenazi, the great commentator from the 16th century, lived not only in the Middle Eastern countries but also in Europe as well. Wrote a book, Yosef Lekach, wonderful commentary. And there he says that it says that there was Mishteh and Yom Tov, and in Shushan there was wonderful rejoicing. That was for the Jews. But Mordechai was dressed up. But Mordechai, it's only Lahudim, only the Jews were able to rejoice. That Tzaddik, Mordechai had Tzaddik, Mordechai who was a great righteous man, he wasn't rejoicing because he knew that there were still problems to be solved. Therefore, Rabbi Ashkenazi deals with the 2 famous verses in Mishlei, that in Proverbs, that we often contrast one with another. It says, on the one hand, Ba'avod v'sha'im rina, when the wicked are destroyed, there's great joy. But on the other hand, it says, Bin fol oyivcha al tismach. When your enemy falls, don't rejoice. So he says as follows. If your enemy is just falling, he's on the way down, but he hasn't fallen yet, then al tismach, don't rejoice. It's not over yet. But ba'avod v'sha'im, when the wicked are truly destroyed, then rina, then there'll be great joy. Only then can there be great joy in the end of days, when we know for sure that the wicked are not just falling, but they're gone. That's Mordechai's idea. That's Mordechai's sobriety. But on Purim, we take perhaps the attitude of the Jews of Shushan, the Jews of that era, who were able to say that, you know what, today we're going to rejoice. Today is a time to rejoice. And that childlike optimism is something that has sustained us throughout the generations. Purim is an eternal story. Isn't it true, as Prime Minister pointed out, how once again we find ourselves threatened by the Persians, threatened by the ISIS, threatened by Hamas and Hezbollah and all around. And yet, Jews continue to live and thrive and survive, not just on Purim, but in general, because we possess that childlike optimism. Thanks for joining us here at the Anshe Sfar Beth Emeth congregation here for our discussion of Purim. Join us each week for a discussion of the Parsha and the various holidays. Thanks to Jason Lefkowitz, our producer. Thank you.
This has been 10 Minutes for Torah with Rabbi Joel Finkelstein. To learn more, visit ASBEE.org.